name is Avani. I am your co-host for Desi Diaries podcast. Welcome to the very first ever episode of Desi Diaries podcast, Voices of
And
Azadi.
yeah, welcome to the very first episode of Desi Diaries, Voices of Azadi. We're really excited that you're joining us.
Okay, so I just kind of wanted to give everybody a preview and understanding of why we decided to start this podcast and what really inspired us to get involved. So a little bit about myself. I am a trans woman of color. I was initially born in Mumbai, India, but I've lived in the United States my whole life, and oftentimes I've had to interact with the Indian community. And to be honest, there were a lot of negative interactions, especially on LGBTQ rights, respect for minority religions, Islam, for example. There's a lot of Islamophobia, as well as a lot of anti-Blackness. So I really want to educate our listeners, especially the Desi Americans who are living in this country, on why they should stand with progressive causes and the social justice movements going on in our nation, rather than against fascism. So we see new representatives now from the Desi American diaspora. We have Tulsi Gabbard in Hawaii, Ro Khanna in California, Pramila Jayapal in Washington State, as well as a plethora of others, from Kamala Harris to Ajit Pai. But not all of that representation, unfortunately, is positive. So we really want to bring stories to you that connect our diaspora to issues in the United States and India, and to really deliver home the importance of getting involved in the political process in both of our
So,
countries.
for myself, I actually was born here in the US and I was very much raised to see myself as an my parents. It was very important to my parents that me and my two sisters assimilated and they gave us a very American identity, which was really nice in the sense of growing up in a country, feeling like, like having the opportunity to be a part of it. I know a lot of South Asian parents are not that accommodating. However, I have fantasies of India that my parents taught me, but I didn't know any of the reality. I am from a religious minority in the Indian context. My family's Christian, but I grew up with the Christian identity.
That is a
I grew
really
up
great and inspiring story. And it's really that experience of being either a religious minority or a gender minority within India that really inspires us to ensure that the Desi community has a progressive voice within the Desi American diaspora, because we're often drowned out by the fascist BJP
Mm.
Hindutva extremist ideology. They cover they're the ones that have the kind of way to set the narrative on what's going on in India. They're influencing textbooks, they're influencing Congress people. So that's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today and really drive home to you guys how you folks, sorry, I wanted to be, gender neutral, you folks. So, how what's going on in America, what's going on in India impacts you and our community, and what we can do to kind of fight back against the rise of bigotry, religious extremism, and the rise of late stage capitalism, which has created a lot of inequality for most people around the world. Start first by introducing the influence of the BJP lobby in the United States. The BJP is a majority party in power in India. It stands for Bharata Janata Party. They believe in an India run on the principles of Hindutva. So Hindutva was an ideology started around the independence time by Hindu extremists who believed that the Indian subcontinent was for the Hindu people and only for the Hindu people, and that those who were Muslims, who were Christians, religious minorities, were forcefully converted, either due to Indian Hindu women marrying Muslim men, which they call as love jihad, or through Hindu women marrying into Christian families, which they considered a foreign and Western influence. So they really believed in a nation centered around Hinduism. It used to be a very small minority party. They, held
Yeah, they were
rallies.
considered a fringe group at one time, right?
Fringe group at one time, yes.
Mhm.
So they didn't really gain much steam until the late 90s and the 2000s when there was a lot of religious clashes. So Narendra Modi, who is now the Prime Minister of India, used to be the central minister of a state, and India calls it Gujarat. That's basically the equivalent of like being a governor of a state, right? So he told the police officers and the RSS, which is called as Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, which is basically the popular mobilization group for all of the Hindutva movement. They train men in combat and fighting and in trying to defend against forceful conversions and self-defense. And Modi basically told the officers and the Hindutva groups to do whatever they wanted to do because, there was some Muslim that attacked a Hindu, therefore it's justified for us to engage in this mass murder. And they were really able to cover it up. The Indian Supreme Court acquitted Modi while they did indicate some of his men. There was a lot of political pressure. And eventually in 2014, this party ended up being the majority party in India after there was a lot of economic discontent. So Congress, which is kind of similar to the Democratic Party, ran on neoliberalism. So they wanted a lot of multinational corporation investments. They were for basically unregulated capitalism and privatization. But the difference is they did believe in a secular government. And
can we backtrack a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned the RSS. So the RSS, you said that they came about during the independence.
Right around the independence movement. Yeah, that would be
So
correct.
who are the RSS? What do they believe in?
Okay, so the RSS is a popular social group. It's both political and cultural wing of the BJP and the whole Hindutva family, which they call as the Sangh Parivar, the Sangh family. So basically what they believe in is the ideology of Hindutva. So Hindutva is the belief that India is a Hindu nation and belongs only to the Hindu religion, and all other cultures need to subordinate themselves to Hinduism.
So it's Hindu extremism, is that correct?
Yes, it's Hindu extremism.
Okay, so it's like a Hindu fascist, Hindu extremist, like a radicalized Hindu movement.
Exactly. It's just like the evangelical movement in the United States. You look at a lot of Jesus Christ's original writings, and they're very progressive. It calls
extremely progressive
to house people. He supported sex workers. He was basically a rebel of his time. And the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the original Hindu documents, is also a very progressive document.
Is it? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, exactly. It calls for LGBTQ inequality, to treat transgender people as normal, whereas Hindutva is a radical distortion, just like evangelicalism here in the United States, where religion is used to meet fascist ends and to gain control of political power by installing fear of other religions. Muslims are terrorists, Christians are foreign invaders, LGBTQ people aren't real, homosexuality should be criminalized, and even increasing taxes for period pads and making services for women more difficult in India as well.
Because they're extremely anti-women, the RSS, because you can't be a member of the RSS unless you're a man or a boy.
Exactly. They used to only recruit upper caste Hindus, people who were in the higher class and economy.
Caste male terrorist organization, pretty much.
Exactly.
Okay.
But they realized that when they were a fringe group, that they needed support amongst the lower caste of Hindus, so that they could also have like a populist spin to them and being like, oh, look, I'm for the people. I helped a poor Hindu. But how they're going to help him is say that, we give you this job, you have to stand for us. And it's because of the Muslims, because of the Christians, because of affirmative action policies, reservation policies for lower castes, to mitigate the caste oppression of thousands and thousands of years. That's the reason why you're not doing well, because we're giving these minorities some crumbs, and that's the problem. And if you fight against this, exactly.
So basically what they're doing is they're taking wealthy dominant castes onto the actual marginalized, oppressed communities of India, and they're getting the masses to hate the oppressed minority communities while they're getting away with the horrible things they're doing. That's creating the actual oppression and joblessness and poverty. Is that correct?
Exactly. And we can kind of use Narendra Modi as an example for that. So he was an 8-year-old boy. He grew up in Gujarat. He was of a lower Hindu caste, and he grew up very poor. And he one day was introduced to RSS, and he kind of gained an interest in their ideology. He started off by being a very low-level member, and then he eventually moved up. He became a very popular figure as religious tensions blew up in India over the Babri Masjid temple in the late 80s, which is a Muslim mosque. And Hindus believe that Lord Rama, had once been there, and that it was actually part of a Hindu temple that was destroyed centuries ago. And they did that with almost no evidence, and they blew up this masjid and tried to install a Hindu temple. And a lot of those religious clashes were beginning in the late 80s as that economic angst kind of started, right? So you kind of had a new era in India of neoliberalism. They had to borrow from the IMF, the World Bank. So they basically corporatized their nation. And a lot of multinational corporations were basically putting these Indian local companies out of business. So with that tension and with the religious tension, somebody like Modi became popular. They saw him as a defender of Hinduism, a folksy grandpa, who does yoga and who sounds really nice,
Yeah.
you know?
So I want to also ask. So you said that when he was, what was his position again in Gujarat?
So yeah, he used to be what was called as a CM, the central minister, which is
Is that like a governor? Like, how would we understand it as an like? So it's like kind of like a governor, right?
yeah, like being the governor of your
Mhm.
state. So that would be like Gavin Newsom in California, over here in Florida, like Ron DeSantis. So he had power over
So
the police department. He also had power to tell the RSS to stand down.
so when you said that they allowed he allowed a mass murder, how many people died and who were the victims?
So the conservative estimates is in the thousands, but there's
Mhm.
really no telling the exact number because
Mhm.
a lot of the investigations have been dropped or hidden or brushed underneath the rug. Especially since the BJP started gaining power, and people in political positions did not want to be seen as opposed to these individuals. The majority
Mhm.
of the individuals killed were the Muslim population, men,
Muslim.
women, and children. Sometimes indiscriminately, weren't even involved with any murder, right? So they were
And
like
it's also there were also mass rapes, right, at the time of Muslim women.
mass rapes. Yep, that's
Because in
correct.
India, with the extremists, with right wing extremists in India, they are what a dangerous country India was for women. I think a lot of and is okay. We have a rape culture in India. I mean, rape culture is global, but there is a very specific rape culture in India. But also, right wing extreme rape as a political weapon. Is that correct? Right. So it's like they're using it as a act of war against whoever they see as their
Yeah, and in fact, that's evident by many of the current BJP leaders in India.
enemy.
The Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. It's a huge network that runs Hindu catechism classes and these morning drill sessions called shakas. The idea is to celebrate 5,000 years of rich Hindu culture. The museum leaves out some parts of RSS history, though, like how the group initially opposed the idea of a secular Indian constitution and called Christians and Muslims internal threats to India. They want to erase our Muslim history and identity, says Syed Ahmed Ansari, a rickshaw driver with a bushy white beard. When Indians were struggling for freedom from colonial rule, we were united. We were all in it together. Why should we focus now on what divides us?
And there is a lot of xenophobia against minority religions. But one thing that's really interesting is that majority of people from minority, not all, because there are very many upper caste Indians who are part of minority religions. But most people, about 80% of the members of minority religions in India, come from historically oppressed castes. And that's the main motivation they had to convert. There's like for Christians, there's a slur that they always call us. And please don't repeat the slur because this is a slur. It's not an okay word. But they
Yeah,
always call us rice bags. And if I go on Twitter, no matter what I say, I get like a bunch of trolls calling me this word, no matter what I'm talking about, just because I have a Christian last name. And this term comes about because there's this like false idea that we converted for like a bag of rice, which isn't true. But even if it is true, people have a right to eat, so I don't see what's to humiliate. But majority of religious minorities in India did convert because if you were from a particular caste, you weren't permitted education. You couldn't have a career goal. You had to only do whatever job that the caste system allowed you. So converting religions was a way of gaining employment. Not just that, but for a lot of people, it was truly belief. If you're in a system that's really oppressing you in another system school, you may believe into that. That could be a very genuine, natural belief, but that's never accepted. We're never accepted as people who had genuine conversion. Is I couldn't find any evidence that any Christians were forced to convert in India. So there's no like that claim. It's more of it's happened in other places, other regions of the world, but it didn't. But that's not quite how it happened in India. So I just wanted to throw that in there. There's a lot of belief, like we're seen as like these outsiders who supported like the Western agenda, but really majority of us are coming from the working class or oppressed rungs of Indian society. So there's an additional casteism and classism that comes into play when religious minorities are seen as
Absolutely.
like sellouts or enemies of the state, you know?
Absolutely. To kind of continue on how this, would connect to us, how is this relevant to Desi Americans, right? There's this extremist Hindutva ideology that has taken over the Indian government. They are in all parts of institutional power all over the country, and they're influencing culture, they're influencing what people think, they're influencing the economy, and basically recreating India in their Hindutva image, right? So that's the dangerous fascist movement that has gained a solid majority in India, right? So the thing was, in 2002, just to go back a little bit, after Narendra Modi was accused of basically allowing a genocide of Muslims to happen in his state, England and the United States, as well as many other nations, banned Narendra Modi, as well as other Hindutva individuals that were implicated in that pogrom of Muslims in 2001 in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and basically said that he was banned from the United States. And so there was an understanding, that he was so extreme that he can't be allowed in the United States, and that what he did was such a violation of international law. Like any serious individual that investigated that and investigated in a fair way would have sent what he did straight up to the International Criminal Court. But they didn't, because they wanted to protect him. They wanted to protect his movement. And as years went by and as the BJP gained power, especially in 2014, when it was evident that Narendra Modi would win, he was able to win on a record of saying that he can grow the economy, that he can put India first, India first. He says that a lot. And, Trump copies a lot of that too. And also delegitimizing the press. So the secular press, is a foreign entity trying to bring down Modi. They're fake news. Nothing that's against the BJP or against Hindutva should be seen as real. So they're really able to shape the image and the opinion of the people that were voting in that election.
Historian Tanika Sarkar says it caught even scholars like her by surprise.
We knew of the RSS vaguely, but we had absolutely no idea of their reach, of the ground level organizations. And they do some good also. They provide schools in remote areas. But along with literacy and so on, they also teach this kind of vicious ethnic hatred.
Thousands of people, mostly Muslims, were killed in riots. And the RSS has poured itself into politics, says Pradip Kumar Datta, a historian and political scientist.
It started as remaking the personhood of the Hindu, but now it seeks to run the country.
It does that today, he says, primarily through its political arm, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP. That's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party. He, the president, and most of the cabinet are all RSS members. Modi joined when he was young. The RSS shaped him. And he still consults it on policy, says columnist Neerja Chowdhury.
Couple of years ago, there was this conclave of RSS leaders, and the Prime Minister and senior ministers went there to get the RSS's views. You have the economic wing of the RSS, their leaders going to see the Finance Minister of India before the budget is formulated.
Chowdhury says the RSS helps shape public school curriculum. It scuttles legislation it doesn't like.
You're starting to see some really reactionary Hindus now running for office, which, Raja kind of preluded to a little bit in the beginning, and I guess now we'll cover a little bit more. So you had Sri Kulkarni, who I believe was in Texas, right? He ran for Congress spot.
Yes.
Right? And he was backed by the RSS as well as other overseas friends of the BJP related groups run so that he could influence policy on behalf of Hindutva.
Can I ask a question? So Is that not because we always you hear so much from Democrats and liberals about Russia collusion, Russia collusion, Russia, 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 to the point that I'm like, if I hear Russia collusion one more time, I'm gonna drive my car off of a bridge. Is how I feel at this point.
Right.
But yeah, the RSS is donating money to Indian American. Not all. There's some very good Indian American politicians. We don't want to create prejudice, but to certain Indian American politicians who have other agendas outside of what's best for the American people. Is that not a foreign collusion?
It is. And
It's
it's very
legal?
similar to the impact that the Israeli or the Zionist lobby has through AIPAC, where they're able to convince both politicians to vote in favor of policies for Israel, and that any opposition for Israel is automatically, it makes you anti-Semite. It's not true, by the way. Noam Chomsky, Normal Finkelstein, as well as many other individuals who actually were in the Holocaust camps have admitted, that the Israeli lobby has undue influence and that they've been oppressing the Palestinians and taking their land. That's the same kind of influence Hindu lobby has. They're able to kind of sanitize their image by getting these politicians to agree with them and to kind of change their international image. Basically,
is it legal?
Who they are.
Is it legal?
Unfortunately, because of Citizens United, because of unlimited money in the political
Citizens United. We need to get rid of Citizens United.
Yep. Unfortunately, because of the very unregulated way our political system is and the influence of corporate money, a lot of this cash can be funneled into U.S. Hindu groups who are very wealthy and have a lot of upper caste Hindu donors here in the United States. For example, like they say, like, beta, you're from India. I mean, you're from the United States. How can you, have an opinion on Indian politics? You don't know anything. But guess what? They're already involved in United States politics.
Yeah.
The BJP had a huge operation to get visa holders, permanent residents, as well as green card holders who are Indians living in the United States to vote in the election for the BJP. And are also getting them to come out and vote for these Hindutva-backed candidates from Sri Kulkarni in Houston, Texas, as well as a primary opposition that recently happened to Ro Khanna, who's a House of Representatives in San Francisco, California.
And Ro Khanna, you like Ro Khanna, right?
I do like Ro Khanna because in 2019, he said that it's the responsibility of all Hindus to reject Hindutva ideology. And what happened to him? The Hindutva lobby smeared him. He's all over WhatsApp groups, the BJP internet world, and they're smearing him as anti-Hindu, as anti-India. And then
they do the same thing to Pramila Jayapal as well, who's really good. She always stands on the right side of every issue here in the U.S. And the Hindu, what is it? The Half Hindu American Foundation.
Yep.
They literally listed her with her face and her name on their website.
Yep. And that's
acting like she's an enemy of their faith. And I believe, is she from a Hindu background herself?
Yeah, Pramila Jayapal is.
Yeah. And so she's Hindu herself, and yet they've tried to present her as a enemy of Hinduism, as they did with Ro Khanna, just because she stood against a lot of anti-Muslim policy in India.
Yeah. And they ran with a Sundin against Ro Khanna in a primary challenge in the Democratic Party. And he ended up winning that election, luckily. But it really shows that Hindutva can really mobilize people and like make a candidate out of someone. And they are actually able to influence these legislators. They're able to change history books, which make Hinduism.
Oh yes, was it Epic? Epic textbook, which is an online textbook.
In California, they started by influencing textbooks in California.
Yeah. But Epic, which is an online textbook for students for online learning, which of course everyone's doing now because pandemic, they had this whole chapter on Modi and how Modi children's book that was included in the Epic curriculum.
Also to wipe away instances of like caste discrimination or other things that would make the Hindu caste system look bad, and really try to paint like Muslims and religious minorities as terrorists and as foreign invaders.
In California, the lobby lobbied against caste being mentioned in California textbooks, and they won. Yeah, and so there's like this pro-Modi stuff that they're introducing into American, and everything that they say pro-Modi, it's like none of those accomplishments he actually ever achieved. They're all lies. And then the California, of course, the huge California textbook issue. Yeah,
so it's going to be interesting to see Kamala Harris.
I was just going to ask you about that. Are there any known ties? I couldn't find anything, but are there any known ties on your part?
She actually doesn't. To my investigations and to my knowledge, she does not have any direct influence. She's not like Tulsi Gabbard or like Kulkarni. She's even made some moderately critical statements about what India did to the Kashmiri territory. So Kashmir is a
Yes.
disputed territory, right? It used to be an independent nation. It's Muslim majority. It was once supposed to go to Pakistan according to the partition agreement, but the king of Kashmir basically ceded Kashmir to India without the democratic vote that the Kashmiris were promised. And most of them wanted to be an independent
Oh.
nation, right? And now you have Pakistan and India going back and forth, trying to gain control. So recently, in India, Modi kind of like removed these protections for Kashmir that they had, and Article 370, I believe, and he got the Indian military to basically take over the government there and to arrest all the opposition leaders, to close off all media, and to basically solidify India's control over all of Kashmir and to ruin it of its independence and of its autonomy. And Kamala Harris, for credit, did
Mind you,
criticize
of the
that.
Nazi regime, right? How they started invading other countries in Europe.
Yeah, and Kamala Harris did criticize that, but I'm not too
Good.
confident that she'd be anti-BJP once she assumes the presidency. I think the BJP lobby will have her ear. She's been known to be someone that gives into corporate influence. She was very tough on crime in California. She bragged about it. She sent mothers whose kids didn't go to school into jail when they didn't even know what their kids were doing.
Yeah.
She laughed at the idea of decriminalizing marijuana. So I
Now
think
she claims that she supports it, but there was a time where she like mocked it.
yeah, and I think she
That's the,
has
yeah, that's
some
my views
members.
on Kamala Harris as well. Like I know she's someone who I think is too smart. Well, for one
Mhm.
thing, I think she has a syncretistic religious outlook where she's Christian as well as Hindu. She seems to practice both. Because I
Right.
know she's a member of the Baptist church here in the US.
Hmm.
And then in India she does have a lot of ties to her family's temple.
Hmm.
Because her mom is Brahmin and the family has a temple, and so she has ties there. But to me, she's just someone who's too intelligent to ever buy into any RSS ideology. But at the same time, she's someone who always follows the money. So she might not necessarily say, "Hey, I'm not going to work with this government if there's a financial benefit for the U.S." Is how I see her.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it comparatively, I think Kamala Harris would be less of a suck up to Narendra Modi. She
Okay,
won't,
good.
she doesn't share Trump's fascism and
Hmm.
hatred for Islam the way that he does. But I still think at the end of the day, they're going to kind of not fully hold accountable what Narendra Modi is doing within India. They're still going to be allies on an international stage. I don't see the military exercises with Israel going away anytime soon, which is done directly to quell any kind of revolution or rebellion in India. So I think they will allow Modi to get away with a lot of the human rights abuses solely because he's the prime minister of India and they don't want to upset a quote unquote US ally. But really, at the end of the day, if you want to look at it in a lesser of two evils perspective, Kamala Harris would be the lesser evil in comparison to Donald J. Trump, who we have no doubt will turn a blind eye and even actively cheerlead every fascist move that Narendra Modi makes in India.
So I want to mention something about Joe Biden. So
Yeah.
of course we know Trump is the best friend of Modi. The worst thing that can happen to India right now, India's right now in terms of America's political landscape, is
Mhm.
Trump winning this election, right? But even Joe Biden, who is the better option, but not a great option, but is with the BJP here in the US. And there was a time where he appointed a well-known person who has a well-known to have affiliations with BJP and RSS,
Yep.
uh, to as Amit Jani, I believe, as his coordinator of or director of Muslim outreach.
And I'm not
So
surprised by that, because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's foreign policy is very similar to the Clintonite Obama foreign policy.
mhm,
So they're not going to be too dissimilar. I still think at the end of the day, they're going to give in to a lot of what the Hindutva lobby does. I think the Hindutva lobby will be powerful, whether Joe Biden or whether Donald Trump is president. So I really think it's up to us as the people. Progressive Desis really influence Joe Biden to really, make apparent and raise awareness about the atrocities that Narendra Modi and his government are doing in India and how they're using their influence in US politics to kind of sanitize their image internationally and to kind of legitimize this Hindutva extremist ideology into the mainstream.
do you
And
think
really,
the
really turn.
American public should be educated as well? Like I know South Asian Americans, we need to be more educated about
Oh,
what's
yeah.
going on. But does the general American also need to know so we can all try to push our leaders to more left?
Yes, because, this is
Mhm,
our tax dollars that's
mhm.
going into these candidates
Yeah.
that are pushing these
Yeah.
policies, right? And I don't want my tax dollars going to fascism. So I think as a United States citizen, if you're not associated with India at all, and if you've been in the United States your whole life, I still think that you should be interested because you don't want your tax dollars going to this kind of reactionary fascist foreign policy where they are killing Muslims, killing innocent people in your name, selling military weapons to India, to Saudi Arabia, and to all these other fascist countries who are then using these weapons on their population, on your tax dollars, on your dime. So I think that you should care. And I think this is something that we need to think about beyond the election.
Trump hosted Modi on stage at a rally in Houston last year. Today, Modi returned the favor, hosting Trump for a giant rally at a cricket stadium in his home state in western India.
This is Modi's home state, and he's just throwing this gigantic welcome party for Trump. It feels like every lamppost in this city is plastered with portraits of Trump and Modi holding hands. My Uber drove under a highway overpass that was draped with a banner that said, "Two dynamic personalities, one momentous occasion."
Wow.
There are there are school groups, there are Hindu nationalist groups, there are business leaders. There are also Indian Americans here.
America loves India, America respects India, and America will always be faithful and loyal friends to the Indian people.
And the crowd cheered when Trump said he's working with India to fight Islamist terrorism.
I don't happen to be a fan of either of these candidates. I was a volunteer for Bernie. I happen to believe that, he would at least be able to push the political spectrum a little bit to the left. I saw it a little bit similar to the Jesse Jackson campaign in the 80s that tried to do the same thing. And, he brought a lot of progressive individuals into the movement. Universal health care, the Green New Deal, as well as other progressive ideas really stuck to me. And Biden doesn't have that. Biden is a typical Democrat. He's a neoliberal. He said nothing will fundamentally change.
Unfortunately.
He's still going to fight these wars in the Middle East. He voted for the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But Trump is just so putrid, so vile, so openly supportive of neo-Confederate forces in the United States. He's practically encouraging the Proud Boys to go violent on these quote-unquote Antifa, left-wing radical protesters that he tries to whip a frenzy into and make us fear. So because of that, because he's so putrid and so vile and so fascist, unfortunately, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, but not because I like Joe Biden, but because I don't like Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, I voted for Joe Biden too. I voted early.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a fan of Joe Biden, of Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people. Oh, I actually want to talk a little more about Kamala Harris. Do we have time for that?
You have like 5 minutes.
Okay, let's do this.
Okay.
So, now you're Tamil, right? You're Tamil. Yep. My father is Tamil. My mother is Telugu. My father is Tamil. And Kamala Harris is Tamil. So a lot of my friends have expected me to feel really represented by her. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that? Do you think as South Asian women we should?
No, I do not think so. She does not represent me as a Desi American or as a South Asian woman. I do not want someone to represent me who supported more punitive measures against prisoners, use them for free labor, who supported harsher policies on drug convictions in California. Someone who is very lackadaisical. They supported Medicare for all, and then suddenly they didn't. They were criticizing Joe Biden so hard in the primary, and then suddenly now Joe Biden's awesome. So I think Kamala Harris is very similar to the Clintonite type of Democratic politics, and I don't want her to represent me. I want somebody more progressive. Somebody who does represent me is Kashama Savant, who's a city council member in Seattle. One of the
Say her name again?
Kashama.
Ashama? Kashama.
Savant, yes.
Savant.
He's the first socialist city council member, non-Democratic Party, non-Republican Party individual to be elected to the city council.
Oh, nice.
And she pushed for a 1% tax on Amazon so that we could have universal housing for homeless people in the city of Seattle,
nice.
Which Amazon lobbied corporate Democrats and Republicans to defeat. So that's an individual that represents me. Pramila Jayapal and the work that Ro Khanna is doing, the work that progressive Indians are doing in India with the labor movement, with the women's rights movement, with the student rights movement.
The anti-caste movement.
Yeah, exactly. That movement, that's the movement that represents me. And that's the kind of movement that I want to see in the future.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't feel obligated to support Kamala Harris because she's
not at all
Indian and South Indian. I'm South Indians, we have South Indian pride. That's a real thing, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to support every South Indian. That's not a statement against identity politics. I hate when people attack identity politics.
Yeah.
But I also don't like it when people weaponize.
Yeah, and it's not too similar to what Hillary Clinton did. Every attack against Hillary Clinton by Bernie Sanders meant that he was a sexist, that he hated women, that he didn't understand the issues of women. It's kind of the same thing that Nancy Pelosi kind of does when somebody tries to criticize her from the left, attacking her history of supporting war and supporting tax cuts, and not really doing much in terms of trying to push for a comprehensive healthcare system. And she's like, "Oh, you're anti-woman. You don't respect the chair." All these, attacks that go against you for being a principled leftist that attacks, individuals that may be women, maybe of a minority identity, but have really, really terrible politics that's going to negatively impact us all. And I think we have to stray away from that. We have to actually look at people's ideas and how that'll actually benefit those oppressed groups rather than if they are from an oppressed group. Because you can be from an oppressed group and stand for white supremacy, and you can also be an oppressed person that stands with your community as well. And I tend to support the oppressed people that stand with their communities.
Like, for example, myself, I identify as a Christian. I was raised in the church,
Right.
But I don't support Republican politics because they say they're Christian.
Right.
I don't support, I'm not a Republican by any means. I never was and I never will be. I don't, when I see like so-called Christians. So for me, I'm not going to just support someone because I share a label with them. I'm going to support them because they want to do what's best for everyone, starting marginalized in the society.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap it up, because we are near at the end, my kind of closing message to you all is, whether you vote for Joe Biden because you're in a swing state, because you consider him a lesser of two evils, whether you decide to vote for the Green Party or not vote at all because you're not satisfied with your choices, the main choice that you need to make is your decision to stand with the mass movement, with Black Lives Matter, with the immigrant rights movement, with the caste suppression movement in India, and all the different progressive movements that are going on in the world. Truly get involved on a day-to-day basis to try to join an organization, attend a protest, call your Congress people and pressure them to stand on the right side of history. Activism is a day-to-day job, and it's going to be something that is important longer than the election. So we really have to see it long-term. And regardless of how you vote this election, I hope that you will stand with these progressive social movements. And I also hope you'll continue to be a listener of this podcast. So you can follow us on Facebook at Desi Diaries podcast, and for all news articles, up-to-date news, as well as all of our podcast recordings.
And what I'm going to say in closing is, if you are South Asian living in the US, talk to your family, talk to your parents, talk to your uncles. Like, I know that I'm from technically a minority group in India, but we're conservative too, and we're conservative. Our culture is conservative, and we really need to start and challenge them to get out of in India is such a South Asia, we're so segregated, all of us, that we don't know the stories of someone who, even if we're under the South Asian or Indian label. So to really get to know each other, and to challenge our family to get out of just thinking about us and to think about the world in a global. And in addition to that, I would say also we're gonna get Twitter going. So please follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is Desi Diaries 2.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Araja. I couldn't agree with you more. So that's all for our podcast today. Tune in for our next podcast. Bye.